Good afternoon for another exciting little interview, fireside chat with myself and Sue, Bike Fitness Coaching. I'm Rick Schultz, and I'll introduce Sue. And we got the pleasure and the privilege of having John Cobb. The website would be speedandcomfort.com. John is a designer and builder of bike seats. And we'll get into those stories and short cranks. You can select, I'll give my example of how I kind of got introduced to John. I'm Rick Schultz, do bike fitness coaching, do a lot of bike fitting. We've just moved up to Oregon and are now expanding our business up here. Sue, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Sue Rowland, and I'm relatively new to the art form of bike fitting. My training is in medical neuroscience, and I'm a professor at UF. And so I'm interested in bicycles. I am passionate about riding, and it's a real privilege to meet the people that work in the field of cycling. And I'm particularly interested in what John Cobb's done. I have my own story about cranks, so maybe we'll get to that later. But it's nice to meet John and everyone else we've had a chance to interview.
Yeah, I met John quite a few years ago at a medicine and cycling event. Curtis Cramblett put those on years ago. They kind of mixed medicine with cycling and what some of the issues were and preventative measures. It was a real good webinar series, not webinar, but a in-house series that Curtis put on. In fact, I sat right behind John during those meetings. I've always thought John was always there to help people. He's the most kind and considerate and great person. If you ever want to talk to John about cranks, he has no problem sitting on the phone with you and making sure that you get the right product. I've sent a number of people over to John. They've discussed it. They've come up with the right cranks, and then we fit them on the right cranks. My first as a dealer, when I got involved with John as a dealer for the cranks, there was a female triathlete, had a Willier, like a 44, 45 centimeter frame. She was about 4'10". The dealer had put on 175 cranks, and she was complaining of knee pain. Had a quick call into, was looking for shorter cranks or as a solution. Found Speed and Comfort, or at the time, I think it was John Cobb, Cobb.com. Anyway, we had a long discussion. He recommended 145s. We put her on 145s, and that solved all of her problems. She went on to racing. Since then, I've fit 50 different people on, I like to call them right size cranks instead of short cranks. It has a kind of a bad connotation. Oh, you're putting mine short cranks, I'm losing all my power. Let's just call them right size cranks for that person. So with that, I would like to talk to John in a little bit more detail about how you kind of got started with, I know your products are bike seats and short cranks, how you kind of got started in those products and how you got started in bike fitting, and you still have people calling you as one of the leading experts in the field. And let's just go forward with that, John.
Well, I appreciate you calling, and it's nice to be here. I started riding bikes in 1972 and rode, I was a friend of mine. Actually, I do a bunch of car stuff, and a friend of mine owed me some money from a car trade, but he didn't have the money, but he had a bike shop, and he says, I'll give you and your wife a couple of nice bikes, in trade. And I said, well, okay. So I got these nice bikes, and said, well, I might as well ride them. And so I went out and started riding a little bit. And, I'm in my cutoff blue jeans and my kids. And there's a local bike ride. So I show up for it and just get dropped like a bad date. It was terrible. And it's just the same experience everybody has. But I kind of liked it. And so I bought some of those black wool shorts. But I don't like to do things by myself. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I started putting a ride on at my house. And I'd gone to the local bike shop and asked them if they'd like this bike ride to leave from their shop, I would take care of it. And they said, no, we don't want y'all in here. And I said, well, that's crazy. So, and I lived about 2 blocks from the shop. So I started the ride at my house, and 2 nights a week, I'd have 40 or 50 bicycles in my front yard, and we'd all load up and go ride, 15 or 20 miles. And that was a big deal back then. But you'd come back and everybody would say the same thing. They said, I had a great time. Y'all are great people, but my butt hurt so bad, or my neck hurt so bad, or my hands are numb, or this or that's wrong. And I'd say, well, I'll go work on it. And I'm a real mechanical kind of a guy. So I would just start tinkering with it. Well, I started trying to find information about how to internet back in the 70s. And so there was just no information. So I just kind of started mentally cataloging that if I moved someone's seat here, then it got better or worse, and do things like that. And kept going on and just fixing people. I would go on rides and see somebody shaking their hands or doing something like that, and I'd say, well, let's pull over on the side of the road and I could adjust this and maybe make it better. And we'd go do long rides. I bless my wife. We'd been married about a year, and we'd do this tour across Oklahoma to Kansas. It was 700 something miles, and it's like 1,500 people. And at night, everybody's sitting around, and they got bottles of talcum powder, shoving them in their shorts, trying to get it comfortable, and just so many things. And people would find out that if they talked to you a little bit, you could help them. And so all of a sudden, my tent's full. I got people, want me to. Finally, I started in the 80s, started being able to learn a little bit more. I have a degree in art, and so I've kind of got an eye where I can look at something and see it and tell if it looks right or wrong. And it's a motion thing. And so it's kind of a good news, bad news thing, because I'll see something and go, well, that's wrong. And I'll just start changing it because mechanically I can do that. Now in my workshop, I've got lathes and mills, and, I can make carbon parts, and I can do all this stuff. And so because of that, I quit fitting people here at my house because I would start making all new aerobars for them or do all this stuff. And so they'd end up spending the night with me. I go, I didn't want that. So anyway, I'm jumping around about that. But we, just kept riding bikes a lot, and did racing. But I started doing triathlon, not because I'm particularly a great athlete, to enjoy swimming in lines. The groups are nice, and you go road racing, and they're nice about 30 minutes after the race. But during the race and before the race, there's no social anything going on. And I'm more of a social person. So I just kind of didn't mess with road racing too much. Did a little bit, but mostly enjoyed triathlons. So I did that, and opened up a couple of retail stores. And so I would start selling bikes, and I can wander around on stories, for a long time. You'd have to stop me and correct me, but I'll tell you how I got started on cranks, and I'll get back to some more on fitting. I do motor stuff, and I was having trouble with these overhead cam motors I was racing at the time. And so my theory was it would break these timing belts because we were running strong. I was trying to figure out how to make it do that without breaking parts. So I go to this factory meeting, and I'm explaining to them that I wanted to go to bigger timing gear pulleys to have more belt surface so that, it would be stronger and all this stuff. This engineer looks at me, he goes, well, you obviously don't know how leverage and gear ratios work. And so he starts explaining all this stuff. And about halfway through his sentence, I go, I got it. We're doing our bicycle cranks all wrong. And they all looked at me and go, what are you talking about? And I go, I'm in the bike business, really, and I understand it. I always thought they had to be longer to make more torque, but you're explaining that doesn't matter. It's where the gears intersect. Well, that really helped me and sent me off on this crank thing. But way before this, in the early 90s, I bought every seat on the planet trying to, make her more comfortable, and I'd adjust it and all that. So I would get out in my shop with my bandsaw. I'd say, okay, point to where it hurts. And she would. And I'd get on my saw and I just cut it off and, kept modifying the seats. And finally, she goes, this is pretty comfortable. I said, okay. And then a couple of her friends would say, well, I want one of those kind of comfortable seats. Okay. So I was doing that. Well, all of a sudden, I'm building 50 seats a week out in my workshop. I go, this is crazy. So I decided I would go to Taiwan and get seats made because there are no U.S. seat makers.
Mhm.
So because I'm a redneck and don't have good sense a lot of times, I just buy a plane ticket to Taiwan and take off, thinking I'll figure it out. And I get over there and I'm wandering around the airport and going, this is a lot bigger than I thought it'd be. So they have a World Trade Center. So a library at the World Trade, I wrote out a list of those, get a taxi, and off I go. And so I stumbled into 2 or 3 seat makers and landed at Velo, who makes everybody's seat over there. And a lady named Stella runs it, and she was very helpful. She recognized pretty quick that I didn't know anything. And my seat looked a lot different than anything she made. So she was kind of interested in that. And so we worked it out. So she started making my seats. What I learned, though, was that one of the real pioneers in the seat business that people don't give enough credit to is Georgina Terry. And she did some pretty smart stuff. And she has a patent on the slot down the middle of the seats for pressure relief. So as I came to find out, I just thought they were always there, but no. It came to find out that Stella from Velo and had worked out a deal so that Stella could lease her patent to anybody that wanted to use it. So that worked out to be good. So I could start using the centerpiece without having to go to court again. And so Stella started making my seats. And I had gone to Georgina one time at a race. She was coming to these duathlons we were having at the time. And I said, Georgina, why don't you start making these seats this way that I make mine and come out with your own product line of these narrow seats? And she looked at me and says, why don't you just quit messing with my seats? I said, well, okay, that's the best shot I got, So I start making seats. And Georgina was kind of veering off into bike manufacturing at that time. So, she was more into the bikes. Anyway, I start making seats and I would put a 2x4 block on my bike, take a big old rat tail file with me and just go bike riding. And when something, I'd just stop and file on it and keep. I could ride this solid. I'd get back, I would have a nice shape and I'd box that up and send it off and they'd make molds on it and make me a new seat. So I did that for quite a few years. It worked out pretty good. And so that's kind of my seat story on that. And if I get involved in a new part of the sport, like when triathlon really took off and we were all starting to use forward geometry, well, you can't do that on a Brooks leather seat. It just does not work out. So, I just start cutting off seats. How short can you make them and where you're hanging off the front, make it a lot better. So I'm out there riding on my piece of wood with my file, and just keep cutting on things. And finally you come up with a shape that's pretty good because there's things you have to consider on a seat. When you're going up a hill, you need it to give you support. When you're cornering, you need your seat to help steer, a lot of that kind of stuff. So you have to think about all that. And so that was good for that. With I don't know if you've read it or not. I hope you have, but I wrote a couple of pretty good articles for women specifically about innies and outies, which is the shape of their crotch, the soft tissue, and how the labia hangs and all that stuff, because that really affects comfort on the seat. Now, my innie and outie articles on my website have gotten more than 2 million views, so somebody likes them, pretty good. But what happens is you'll take some girl that's 30 and she's going to go into a bike shop because her crotch hurts on a new bike, and they're expecting her to talk to some 20-year-old guy about her crotch. It just doesn't work out. So I said, look, all you got to do is just tell the guy to go read this article, and then all you got to look at him and say is, I'm an innie or I'm an outie, and he can choose between 4 or 5 seats and help you. That's turned out to be very really been a good thing. I get a lot of compliments on that. And so that may be my finest achievement in cycling. Crazy to think that, but anyway, so that's what's happening on seats. On cranks, y'all know Jim Martin, or you've heard of Jim Martin, and he's a professor of something in this University of Utah or Salt Lake, something. We're up there. And he's a real smart guy. And when I first met him, I was doing all this wind tunnel work down at Texas A&M, and he was a grad student at UT Austin. And somebody told him that there was some guy at A&M doing a bunch of wind tunnel stuff. So he shows up down there, and we start talking. And at that time, so this is in the late 80s, or maybe 1990. There weren't power meters yet or anything. And a fellow named Spangler had built watts, and Spangler and Gary Hooker are big car racing guys, and they understood dynamometers and horsepower and all. But there was no way to measure humans at the time. And so they developed this thing, this rear hub. So you had to lace it into a wheel. Anyway, they sent it to me. I laced it into a wheel, started riding around on it, and it was this big plastic box that would sit on your handlebars. But it, gave out numbers, and I certainly didn't know what the numbers meant. But after you rode it for a little bit, you could say, well, I'm going up this hill, and it always seems to say 300 or something like that. So, okay. Well, I have it down at the wind tunnel with me, because just about that same time, I had Steve Head start testing wheels with me down there. And Steve's a real curious, or was a real curious kind of a guy, real progressive thinking. And he starts looking into it. So, yeah, this is cool. And blah, and so he looks at it. So he goes back, because he's a doctoral student, and finds out that there's a young man in Germany that's building a new power meter called SRMs. But they weren't quite in production, but he got one. So he brings it to the wind tunnel down at A&M, and we start building a correlation between drag and watts. Well, once you have those two pieces of information, it's pretty easy to come up with some pretty good information. So we would take a rider, put him in the wind tunnel, and get his aerodynamic drag in a certain position. Then I leased the runway, which is right across the street from the wind tunnel, from the airport, and we'd take the riders out there and have them do these measured half-mile runs up and down the runway at given number of watts. And we did that on, I don't know, 30 riders. I mean, he was real interested in it, and so we just kept spending the money and doing it. And so he ended up building the formulas that we all use still, like for training peaks and all, to where you can punch in your weight and your, if you know your wattage and you know your height and weight, you can kind of guess at your aerodynamic drag, and you can end up with your time estimate over a Ironman or a 40K or whatever you want. Well, that's turned out to be pretty helpful for people. And Jim's a doctoral guy, so he knows how to write articles and do all that stuff. I do not have patience for doing any of that, and I just want to move on to the next project. So we did a lot of testing, and we were able to test all kind of wheels and aerobars and all this stuff, and really tie it to wattage gains or losses by things. And all this aero testing is real good until the marketing departments get a hold of it. And these guys are coming on saying, oh, if you change this pulley, you'll gain 1 watt of power. Well, there's not a power meter on the market that's within a percent of accuracy. And so when you're making 200 watts and your power meter is not within 1 or 2%, how are you going to ever know if your little jockey pulley is making 1 watt extra of power? Well, there's like no way. But you spent $500 on it, so maybe it motivates you to pedal harder or something. I don't know about that. But anyway, I always tell people to take marketing information, like they say, the world's fastest frame or the world's fastest wheel or the fastest whatever. Take that all with a grain of salt, I was down there testing one time. Rabobank team had contacted me because they had their premier rider had not scored enough points to get to go to the Tour de France that particular year. And they said, can we bring him to this wind tunnel? And can you fix him for a time trial so he can go faster? I said, sure. So these bunch of Italian guys show up at the wind tunnel, and it's everything you'd think. They're all from Switzerland, and they're intermingling with the Italians because the Italians, Wheeler people, that actually were building their bikes, and everybody's yelling, doing all their hand stuff and all that. Oh, this is slow, that's slow, whatever, I'm going, whatever. So I'm showing them, and I got the young man in there, and he's pedaling, doing all this stuff, and I said, well, best thing I can tell y'all is you need to have this guy not wear a helmet because he's so moving on the bike that he just needs to wear a cotton cap or something real tight because he had bushy hair. I said, just put him in a tight cotton cap. Rudy Project was one of their, and they said, well, Rudy's kind of wants their helmet on there. And I said, well, I can fix Rudy's helmet, but he can't wear anything they make currently because they're all bad. And so down in at A&M downstairs, they've got this huge workshop. So I go down to the workshop, get on the bandsaw, and just cut their helmet all up. Take clay, build the backside of it, make it pretty swoopy looking. Take it back up there and test the guy. It's fast. Guy's fast. Rudy Project people are there, and they're going, this is a big problem. I go, no, it's just your problem. It's you need to go fix your helmet. So they go back to Italy and whip up some kind of helmet for the young man off my design. And he qualifies for the tour and does pretty good. So that was nice. Well, then they come to me and they say, we want you just to design us the world's fastest time trial helmet. I said, well, that'd be a great honor. I said, who do you want the helmet to be for? Oh, you're going to need about every individual. It depends on their shoulder shape, and it depends on their hand position and their, all kind of stuff, how big their ears are, as to what's going to be fast or slow. And they were a little hesitant about that. I said, now I'll build you a pretty swoopy looking helmet. I said, but what you want to do is build the most comfortable helmet. And they weren't quite there on that. And I had just finished doing a test on steering torque, on how stem length affected your shoulder strength when you're riding on aerobars and in crosswind, which is affected by the depth of your front wheel. And so I had this fixture I built that measured torque and all that. I said, well, this is going to be cool. You'll like this. I said, let's take any helmet you want. We'll take 3 or 4 of them and set them on this fixture. We'll measure the torque, yaw angles. It's cross. Okay, so we build all this, and by now they're saying, we don't want to go to Texas anymore. No food there. Nothing's good. Come to Italy. Come to the Pininfarina wind tunnel. I go, well, that's a pretty cool deal. I'll do that. So we go to Italy. It's a cool deal. They got Ferraris and stuff everywhere in the Pininfarina wind tunnel. It's beautiful. I mean, it's everything Italian. So I take my little fixture and set it up, and we start testing things. And I said, now look, if you move the helmet forward or back, or if you change the tail shape or do this and that, you can get the helmet to have 0 torque on the rider's neck. And so I showed them how 2 pounds of torque, which is just like pushing on your shoulder just a little bit. 2 pounds of torque after 100 miles, you can't hold your head up. I said, and some of these helmets were making torque with the long tails on and all that stuff. I said, let's go to a 0 torque helmet. So we kept building stuff, got that done. And so they made some samples, and we took them to Kona. People are going down the Quinque Highway to come back and go, how'd you like it? And they go, man, that's the most comfortable helmet I've ever had in my life. I could wear it all day long. I go, that's right, because it's not twisting your neck. And I went to Kona like 30 straight years. And so you just know you can go out to mile 35 or 40 and you see these male and female athletes that look like bodybuilders, goddesses and all. And they're on the side of the road doing back stretches because their position's wrong or their neck's killing them or all this stuff. Well, you got to fix all that. I don't care how aero your bike is. If you can't stay in the aero bars and pedal it, you're just spending money. So it turned out that the Rudy helmets were pretty popular. They were the #1 helmet straight years by a factor of 10. So I like that. The point of all that rambling is I try to tell young people that if you see something that bothers you, work on it. And you say, well, I don't know how to work on things. I don't have a milling machine or a welder or whatever. I said, it doesn't matter. Ask around. Somebody will. Call me. I'll help you. But ask questions, because nobody's the smartest guy in the world. And you have to be open-minded to accept, criticism and the congratulations. But if you think that, you're doing something and you say, I believe I need this done, some different handlebar or something, go build it. It doesn't matter if it's crude looking, and let people test it and see how it goes. That's how the sport's progressing. And to give full credit, I started watching this YouTube and I don't know it, in Europe. And this guy's about late 40s, and he's kind of a little bit overweight, and he's doing bike fitting. But he does a good little YouTube thing, and he does a good little talk on seat height and all. Well, last month, and so this would be in May, I was doing an off-road duathlon. So I'm on the run, first part of the run. It's a 3-mile run out in the woods, and I'm going, it's raining, of course, So I'm running down this hill, and I trip on something, crash, and break my little finger. So I'm all pitiful. And I've still got to run about a mile to get out of the woods. Okay, so I man up, get out of the woods. And by the time I got back to the transition area, my hand had turned blue and was starting to swell up. And everybody was looking at it going, yeah, that kind of sucks. That's broken. I'm like, well, it doesn't hurt bad. It's just not pretty. So I go do the bike, get that done, and then do the second run. Can be. But it's a race day. Well, I noticed that I couldn't ride my road bike very good. It was just killing my hand. And the doctors had put me in a splint, and I put up with that for about 2 weeks. And then I said, well, I just can't do that. So I have for years used 46-centimeter bars on my road bikes because I felt like I could climb better with them. But I'm watching Bike Shop Eddie, or whatever his name is, from Edinburgh, and he's saying, now, if your hands aren't straight, if your hands are out, it's going to cause all these problems. Well, as fitters, it's just like the cobbler has no shoes. As fitters, you just do something and go do it. I always tell people, you can't fit yourself. There's like no way. You just always do it wrong. And I sit there and I'm watching him. I go, that's exactly what I'm girl about hunting up some 36 bars, because she was wanting to do some kind of UCI racing. And so I go and take my bike all apart and found some 39 width center to center bars and put on there. Went and rode. As of yesterday, had a 30-mile ride that was great. I didn't have any hand problems or anything. So hats off to Edberg Bike Fit for reminding me to look into the basics. And that's just one of the things you have to do. You have to keep going back. This past week, I had the honor and there's a local medical university here where they teach sports medicine. Well, they teach all kind of medicine, but the sports medicine people are very easy to work with. So about once a year, they send a bunch of their students to me to learn about bike fitting. And they do that so that I can show them how, because I've got adjustable cranks and all this stuff. I can show them how something, they need to use different length cranks to help with flexibility and all that. And it turned out on this program, this fellowship, they it's about a 15 or 20 page test they have to take, and one whole page covers bike fitting. Because all these orthopedics across America are having people come in with problems. They're coming in with hand numbness, or they're coming in with back problems, or all these things. Well, I was glad to hear that, because now people like yourselves who do bike fitting can get more involved with orthopedist in your area and get better information out there, because they don't have access to it otherwise. That was one of the premises that the medicine of cycling was trying to accomplish. They just ran into COVID. That was the biggest problem. But, the principles were good. And so I got, there was a bunch of fun fist camps, and I'll go into that whole mess in a minute. But if you have 10 people and give them each a goniometer and the same rider, you get 10 different answers on leg extension.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean they're all wrong. It just means they're all different. So that's what we learned at the fist camps. When Dan first started wanting to do that, he was making Quintana Roo bikes, and he was I was a big dealer of his, and I would go with him and Steve Head to Kona, and we would, I'll give you a quick side story on that. If you get tired of these stories, just stop me.
Oh,
But
no, go ahead. This is great.
I would put on a milk crate in the back of B&L Cycles, which was just this metal building, the only bike shop in Kona. And at the time, this is in 89 and 90, 92, they first come out, and we had found some reverse seat posts, and I was having stems made that were like 210 to 240 long. So these are pretty long stems. And we would go there, and I'd sit on a milk crate, and people would come in, and I'd look at them, and I'd write some notes and say, go get this done, and end up with your seat here and there. And we had 6 mechanics, and they'd roll into the shop and get all this done. Now, half the people were from Europe and didn't even speak English, and none of them knew who I was. But they did find out pretty quick that if you did not go to B&L and let that guy on that milk crate look at your bike, you were going to be slow, because people were getting fixed, going directly out the front door onto the Queen K Highway, coming back, just couldn't be happier. So I was fitting essentially 200 people a day. And you learn a lot doing that. So people were going out, ride back, and just telling it was kind of a fun time. So Dan is doing his Quintana Roo bikes. So he got me to go with him, and we put on this road tour. And he'd go to different towns like Memphis and Atlanta and New York and Phoenix and all kinds of places, and put on these 2-day shows where you could come in, and we had a bunch of trainers set up, and you could bring your bike in, and we'd look at you and adjust you. And by the way, your bike's junk. You ought to look at a Quintana Roo anyway, because it fits you better. So we were fitting a lot of people doing that, and you learn a lot. And then Paul Swift came in. He heard about what we were doing, and he was all into the cleat wedges and all that stuff. So he joined our little band of merry men going around the country, and we were doing cleat wedges, and you learn a bunch when you get people together like that. And so we all learned a lot of stuff, and you'd track the athletes and how they did in their events, and off they go. Well, I told Dan, I said, look, I've got retail business to run. I can't be on the road all the time. And he says, well, I'm going to start a school. I said, because what was important to Dan was that people buy the right size frame. He didn't want to be an orthopedic. He didn't want to educate people on all that, cleat wedges. He had no interest in that. He just wanted people to go into a shop and get the right size bike and get the stack and the reach and all that worked out. So, and Dan's like a big math guy. He's an engineer, a doctorate or something in math of some kind. So it made sense to him. And so I'd go up to his house, and we started doing these camps. We'd have dealers come in, as QR dealers would come in and learn how to fit people and size them for the bikes correctly. That was good. Then after a little bit, senior moments right now, but he has Speed Shop 51 up in Indianapolis. Anyway, he started coming in, and he started doing the camera system, for fitting. And I can't even think of the name of that right now. But they would film all these people getting fitted and have these motion cameras and do all the little dots and all that stuff. So they were able to build a pretty good network of information on that. And then as they started selling that system to dealers, the dealers had to type in all their information and send it into this big center pool. So there was a pretty good database, and then Specialized bought that system, and then that was their fit system. Whereas if you bought a bike, you could come in and they would just set the bars and the seat height to a certain thing, and then you were from the standpoint that they weren't going to hurt anybody. So that's when I started calling all those people bike positioners, but they're not fitters, because fitters are people that can do cleat wedges or do handlebar width and do things like that that'll fix problems. If you take the average person who's had their bike for a year and they come in to get fit because they're going numb or their feet are on fire or something like that, well, that's not a problem of wrong size frame a lot of times. It's just that their cleats aren't in the right place, or myriad of problems, and the seat ends up being a big key ingredient to that, because people lose sight of the fact that your seat has a couple of functions. One is to hold you up, and the other is to build core support for you. So when I'm fitting someone on a bike now, the biggest question I ask them is, how is your, it's not bad. And I go, really? Well, your knuckles are all white, and that doesn't look like a good thing. And they say, oh, well, it's okay. And I go, okay, while you're pedaling under a little bit of a load, can you lift your hands off your brake hoods 1/4 of an inch without doing a face plant? They go, oh, yeah. And they try it, and they just boom right down, the face goes down. I go, well, see, that's not going to work out for you. So the key there is I start running the nose of the seat up higher. And they go, oh, no, I can't have the nose of my seat up at all. I want it down. I go, no, you want your seat down because you're not sitting on it right, or, it's not in the right place on your bike. I said, but you got to get the seat up to build core support to hold you. That's the only way you're going to get going. So, you start jacking your seat up, and people look at it, and I said, just don't look at it. Just don't look at it. It looks like a rocket taking off. Your hands are light when you get it that way. And they go, really, it doesn't really feel too bad. It's kind of okay. I said, yeah, because you're sitting back on where you ought to be on it, And I mean, this is road bikes, tri bikes, it doesn't matter. And now, especially with tri bikes, everybody's like got the aerobars all out and up in your face and all that. You're kind of suspended like in a hammock. So they're running a kind of a crazy thing, but your seat still has to support you. You cannot run 100 miles on your legs and then get off and run a marathon. You've got to be sitting on that seat to take pressure off your hip flexors and all that stuff so that you can get off and do the marathon run. So people can't discount the value of the seat and all that, which is a good deal for me. I'm in the seat business. Mm-hmm. But, it still has to do with positioning. And so you're, asking more, and it's where you go to a track and you ride around the track, and then they change your position and they give you all this aero number and stuff. The problem with that system is that if you're a pro rider and you're pretty good, you can go out and maintain 300 watts for a little bit and get accurate tests. When I test people, I talk to them about their 5K running time or 10K running time or whatever the running time is. And you can take those kind of running times and look at their physical fitness and kind of estimate their wattage for going down the road. And you say, well, okay, I'm going to do an Ironman, and I hope to do a sub-6 Ironman. You say, okay. So this lady, to do a sub-6 Ironman, and let's say that she's 5'5" and weighs 140 pounds, but is, in good shape. Well, that means she's going to have to average about 135 or 40 watts that time bracket. And I got up. I use a cat-eye system that, something like that. It's this thing I built. But anyway, you can punch it at 140 watts and it'll just sit there. You can change gears, you can do anything you want, but you're going to be overcoming 140 watts with it. Well, for about the first 15, 20 minutes, that's okay. But then all of a sudden you notice they're sweating a little bit. You go, yeah, now we can start doing some fitting because now you're starting to sit on the bike right. And if you don't have somebody pedal under load for at least 20 minutes, you really don't know where they're going to be on that bike. Well, if somebody's going to do an Ironman and they're pedaling at 140 watts, they've got to be comfortable and they've got to have support and they've still got to get off and run. And I kind of lost track on where I was going because I got to thinking about something that you ought to is your customers will come in and go, and I've got a FTP of 180 watts. And I go, how long was that test for? Oh, 20 minutes. I go, okay, that's good. How long's your Ironman going to be? Oh, well, I'll be out there, 5.5 hours. Okay. Well, that 20-minute test doesn't mean squat. Bring you all your liquids that you're going to drink up here. We'll set you a table up and I'll put your big old fan blowing on you. And let's do a 2-hour FTP test and see where you're at. Because that's more realistic. A 20-minute test is just leading you down the path of misery. You will not get good information off of that. A 45-minute test, which is available, helps a little bit, but it doesn't really get into your nutrition because nutrition on Ironman stuff or half Ironman stuff is what puts you in or out of the race. So if you're doing a 2-hour FTP test at 100, whatever you think it's going to take to achieve your time goal, you've got to power it with the right nutrition. And that's what you want to test in that FTP thing. That's where you're giving your customers great information. I'm going to throw that out. Does that make sense to y'all?
Yeah, and in fact, John, there was we do Ruvi ride 7 days a week on using Ruvi indoor training, and people are starting to talk about, hey, what's the best test? FTP test, Ruvi has one in there. They have a step test. They have this test, that test, and I started asking the things I came up with as a coach as well. The things I came up against were that people would use that 5%. Okay, I'm doing my 20-minute FTP test minus 5%. And then I started saying, well, why don't let's try using that 5% and try doing that number for an hour. And the results came back. I think I talked to about 15 people. The results came back, that 5% doesn't work. I needed 8%, or the most was 15%. I needed that 20-minute test minus 15% to get me through the hour of a number. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. In order to get real numbers, now the FTP test, if you go back and look at all the FTP tests, they're basically geared for pro cyclists, and those people, those pros are trained to do 20 minutes or an hour at a high power output. The rest of us aren't. And unless you're training for an FTP test, you're not going to do, like you're saying, you're not going to do those numbers that the FTP test says you're supposed to do. And the second thing, going back what you were saying on the saddles, a lot of fitters know how to fit, or they fit people on a road bike. A tri-bike comes in, they will fit that person on the tri-bike like a road bike, take all the measurements, they're sitting back in the saddle, yet when they're, like you said, when they're out there pushing the power for a number of hours, they're sliding forward maybe 6 to 8 inches from where they got fit to. Now, how valid is that fit that you gave them when now they're sitting 8 inches further forward than the fitter fit them? So there's another little help, is that what John is saying is absolutely correct. Get the person into the position that they're going to be riding or racing in, and then do the fit analysis on them instead of fitting them initially and then they're done and out the door. That's not going to do anybody any good.
No, and it turns out that the people that actually pay my bills are the age group racers, not pros. It's fun to mess with pros. It's cool looking. They give you a jersey or something, but they don't pay the bills.
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention to your people that are bringing you the money. And that's what I tell these young fitters. They say, well, how do I get experience? I said, well, man, get you a couple of trainers and you'll get a lot of experience. But you have to work with the people that are ultimately going to pay you. And so I just think that's one thing to consider.
Yeah, exactly. And my experience with that, and then I want to turn it over to Sue and have her tell you her experience with what crank she was riding and how it started on Ruby also. And another thing is that a good invention for you is to come up on the Wahoo Kicker bike is a very popular bike right now. The problem is it only goes down to 165, and there's a lot of people that need less than 160, shorter than 165 cranks. There's no option, and they're still hurting their knees, even at the lowest. So Wahoo needs some kind of an invention on the Kicker bike to get it down to 155, 150, 145, so everybody can ride the bike. Now, I was an old racer and Cat 3 at one point in time. And I
Yeah,
was
I've
on
got a
the,
thing that I've built for a few customers that I did for their bikes, and but I just have to go out to my shop and machine them. But it works pretty good. It's an adjustable thing and all. But it's just a project I hadn't wanted to completely start right now. But there is a big need for it.
yeah, exactly. And if you look at how the crank arm is built on Wahoo, it's kind of, it mushrooms out at the end and it has like 5 different crank adjustments for the pedal. But
Mhm.
as the old cyclist used to race, it was 175 crank length. And after you do a few years of racing and training, you start getting knee pain. So the latest thing was the latest craze was 172 and a half. So I went with that. That was a little better. All my bikes, I'm 6 foot tall. All my bikes are 170 crank lengths right now. And that did away with all the knee pain for me. Now, to get to that point and to understand what happens, a lot of people, a lot of fitters, I'm guessing, really don't know how the knee works in respect to what's called a leg extensor. So how is, when you're pedaling from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, you're extending your leg. What mechanics happens in what muscles and what joints and what tendons actually work to extend that leg outwards for power? The more power you're producing with too long of crank arms, the more pressure and damage you're doing to the patellofemoral head because you're putting too high a pressure of the patella, ramming it into as you're bending the knee. Because if you look at it, the patella tendon does not stretch. So the more you try to bend something that doesn't stretch over the top, the more vector, if you study vector forces, talking about a math guy, the more force you're putting this way through the knee and you're abrading away articular cartilage, you're starting to create arthritis in your knees. And in fact, look at the old pro cyclists back in the 50s and 60s were running really long cranks. They had to retire at 24 years old because their knees were blown out. So now I went to an orthopedic surgeon, a friend that actually used to race Leadville. So he was an old racer too. And we got into a real long discussion about how the knee works, how the quads work, how the quads pull on when you flex your quads, they pull on the patella tendon, which then pulls on the tibial tuberosity where it's tied, where the patella tendon is tied into the tibia and extends the leg up. And he went through all of the forces and he explained in great detail how the knee works because he does knee surgery, he does knee replacement, so he understands. And he said, yeah, that's a common problem with cyclists, just put them on shorter cranks. And we got into another discussion is that if you read papers from these PhD students or the universities, they talk about how to mitigate knee pain. Well, they say just raise a saddle to loosen that angle at the top of the pedal stroke. And it's the angle at the top of the pedal stroke that causes the damage, not the 6 o'clock position. So what happens is, my argument says, okay, what if I raise the saddle to the point where they can't reach the bottom of the pedal stroke anymore? Now what do you do? And the answer is, well, yeah, put them on shorter cranks to get the right the less knee flexion at the top of the pedal stroke. So yeah, you need to go back, and one note for the fitters, if you really want to become a good fitter, learn biomechanics, learn kinesiology, learn anatomy. With those 3, you're going to be far advanced compared to the other fitters out there, because you will know and understand how the body moves and the limitations, the range of motion limitations. And again, what John said earlier is that you're going to get 10 people fit the same person, and you're going to get 10 different measurements through the goniometer. And yes, the other way around it is you can get 10 people that are 6 foot tall, and they're all going to have a different bike fit because they're going to have a different arm length. They're going to have a different torso to leg length ratio. They're going to have different femur to tibia lengths, and they're all going to be differently fit on the bicycle. And you have to understand how to put somebody on a bicycle and in a safe range. And that's where these studies come from. So John, you're absolutely correct. And with Sue, I'd like to get to Sue's story real quick, is that how she started. She had you have a Trek, and you also have a Wahoo kicker bike. So go ahead. What was your experience with the riding with too long of cranks, and what happened from there?
Okay, well, my road bike is a Trek Silk, and I had that long before I had a kicker bike. And I enjoyed riding a great deal. My first problem, well, I had two really big problems that we've solved. One was my seat was too narrow, and it was causing all kinds of pain and distortion and all kinds of problems. And so that was fixed by going to 155. And right now I ride a Power Mimic, a specialized seat, and I've never had a more comfortable seat. So we fixed that. The second problem I was having is I kept getting hot foot after maybe 40, 50 miles. And it was excruciating, basically. I mean, I had to stop. And I was riding specialized cycling shoes, and it turns out they were too narrow. I mean, while they fit the foot, with time especially, and I was riding in Florida, I was getting a lot of foot pain. So I've switched to a different shoe that's wider, and I use an excellent insole that happens to have the metatarsal bump in the right place for my foot. And I haven't had any foot pain since. And then the other thing, so I've changed my shoes. I changed the cleat position on my shoes so it's back, allowing me to exert more force through the pedal on the pedal stroke. I mean, I can feel it, so I can pull it up better, I can push it down. Okay. The third problem, actually there were several. The next problem was I was having a little bit of knee discomfort. I'm 5'4", so I was riding, I think it came with a 170. And so, Rick was saying, well, you should try shorter. So, I mean, there was a series of steps that went through. So during that time, I also got the kicker bike, and the kicker bike let me adjust to 165. And I immediately noticed that that was way better than 170. And I was surprised that 5 millimeters was so significant. So, but Rick said, oh, well, maybe you should try 155. So I got some rotor cranks for my road bike. And the first ride on those was awesome. I felt like I was riding in a way that I could see the pros made it look. In other words, it's easy. This should not be hard. And you should be able to move your feet around at a reasonable cadence without knocking yourself out. So the 155 crank on my road bike is very good. I'm not sure if shorter would be better. I haven't had that opportunity, but 155 is good. And then the fourth, was the stem length. In all cases, I was never able to reach the hoods on any bike. And so I'm now at I think a 50 millimeter on my road bike and a 33 on the kicker bike. So I went to like a mountain bike stem on the kicker bike, and that has helped a lot. So I'm no longer reaching, and I can fit the rest of the bike properly. So for me, there were a lot of adjustments that needed to be made from the standard bike. So the standard bike I'm riding is a 52. And so I'm all happy with everything now, except, and Rick sort of mentioned this, so if I could prompt you if you made a custom crank for a Wahoo that would allow me to get to 155 or slightly below, I would be ecstatic. We ride it a lot, and 165 is just not okay. And I haven't been able to get that fixed. And I think if it could be, I would increase my power. I know I would. I would also not have any what I call middle knee joint kind of discomfort, which is where it seems to be. But I'm most intrigued listening to you. I cannot visualize what you were doing when you were designing saddles, because if you were going out on the road with a block of wood and you were stopping and shaving the shape as you were riding, that is just stunning. I don't think I've ever really thought of anybody being that determined to get it right. And thinking about it, it's obviously the most efficient way to do it, but I can't think of too many people who would be willing to do that. So that's quite the accomplishment.
Well, another product I make is shorts, cycling shorts.
Yep.
And people will buy my shorts and they send them right back and they go, "I'm sorry, you sent me some shorts that don't have a chamois in them." And I go, "I don't use chamois in my shorts." And when I started riding, we all had black wool shorts with chamois in them, which was real sheepskin. And it's super thin.
Yeah.
Well, as long about in the late 80s, leather seats went away and plastic seats showed up. And plastic seats just had square edges and all of that, and they were super uncomfortable. Started putting foam in the chamois. It's like wearing diapers. And they hold water and they do all this stuff. And so you never sit on your seat. So my seats are admittedly not pretty. They're bulky looking, even though they're little, because they have padding in them. And I went to some clothing mills, cloth mills, and if you take your hand and just rub up and down on your shirt, you'll feel it. And then if you go 90 degrees to that, you'll feel how it sticks your material, your hand. It doesn't slide smooth. So I had some material made that doesn't have any stiction. That means it doesn't drag on your skin in any direction.
Wow.
And I put that in my shorts. And it's thin, but it's exactly what it says. And the other thing I do on my shorts is they're built like a sunflower. The chamois is the center, and then all the panels right from that. All these other shorts have a rib that goes right underneath the chamois in both directions with a big knot right in the middle of it that you're sitting on. There's nothing good about that. So my shorts have a chamois, but it's thin, but it's so that you move, you don't stick to it. And then with my seats, they really work pretty good. And I mean, I've got people that have done multiple Ironman races on them. And I've got all kind of runners because my women's shorts are a specific pattern different from the men's. The women's shorts women have a thing in their crotch called a gap. It's where your upper thigh comes into your crotch area. Well, my shorts have a panel that pulls the material up in that gap, because that point is where everybody gets saddle sores. Yep. Saddle sores happen when your skin's rubbing wrong. So my women's shorts have a panel that pulls the material up in the gap. Don't have that. My men's shorts kind of have more bag shape on the front to hold you in position more. My shorts are the best running shorts you'll ever put on for just doing running. They're super. I sell a ton of them for runners. And the bikers that use my product like them pretty well. But shorts that have a chamois at all are bad. And I give that lecture all the time. And especially if your bike's not fit right, where you're scrubbing on the seat because your seat height's wrong or something, then you're just down the road. And to this day, there are bike shops that say, "Oh, just put on 2 pair of shorts. You just need more padding." No, that's like run out of that shop. run out of that shop. So I hear what you're saying. I would guess that if I looked at you on your bike right now and you're riding a 48 bike size bike,
51 or 52, I think you said.
52 for road bike,
what size bike are you on?
52.
52 centimeter.
This is the suit.
Right,
52?
52.
52?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm working on now in fittings are, and a couple of years ago, about 15 years ago now, all these product managers get together and they're starting to make carbon frames. Well, the first thing they do is start making the head tubes taller on all these bikes. Now, if you'll go back and look at some old bike magazines where they were road racing, the road racing guys had their bars just about level with the top of their top tube. Merckx, all the fast guys, Le Mans, they all had their bars just about level with their top tube. Well, nowadays, when you do that, your bars are 2 or 3 inches too high. So I came out with a set of handlebar stems made for dropping your bars down to 35-degree drop. So it looks crazy, but you take and put your bars down, they would have been a long time ago. And once you get your bars down, then all of a sudden that reach isn't such a problem. It's not uncommon for me to fit somebody on a bike and have 11 or 12 inches of drop. And I'm not talking centimeters, I'm talking inches.
I don't know.
And it's crazy looking.
Yeah.
So if you took your bike, put a negative drop stem on there, one of my 35-degree negative drop stems, and had it so that your top of your bar was level with your top tube, then you could rotate your hips forward. You'll have to rearrange your seat. I don't know how it's going to work on that seat you're riding, but I know a guy that makes seats that'll work with it. But I think you would rotate forward and you would see that you could build more. And the whole test, see how much hand weight you have. So it'd be a good thing for you to go do. It'll be a fun game. But call me and I'll help you with some pieces and get you going on that. But I think you'd like it. But what happens is if you don't have fitters trying different things, if everybody gets fit exactly the same, the sport's not making progress. In 88, we had, before 88, so I guess in the winter of 88 or something like that, we had Le Mans at the wind tunnel because Boone Lennon had come up with these aerobars. Nobody had seen them. And Steve Head got him in there. And so we got Le Mans in there. And Le Mans says, I don't know anything. These things are crazy looking. I don't need them. I'm more powerful. I can overcome them. So, okay, let's play that game because, you can make 400 watts. Okay. Well, how is it? Can you make 500 watts? And we dial up the watts thing. And he goes, oh, no. And so they're all going, bad. I don't believe it. Well, it turned out the last day, the Tour de France, he was 50 seconds behind Laurent Fignon and, wanted to win. They called us. Do these aerobars really work? And I go, I'm pretty sure they do. Put them on. Well, rest is history. He puts them on. He wins by 6 seconds. We're all heroes. Good deal. But that's how technology works. You've got to have somebody make a move that's different. That's what's happened with triathlon bikes. Now everybody's got bars up in their face, and now they're all got short cranks. But that's because different fitters are brave enough to make changes to progress the field. And if you start looking at these pro riders, they're all running huge amounts of drop on their bars, big drops. But look at how they're riding. They're all more forward. They're changing their seats. Every manufacturers come out with some pressure relief seat now. So the short cranks. I did a lot of wind tunnel work on can you go too low on the front end of a bike. So I had two riders, actually. They were the state time trial champions in California. And the guy was like 6'2", and the girl's like 5'8". and they knew their watts. They were meticulous on all their stuff. And I bring them down the wind tunnel, test them. I said, okay, we're just going to keep. We knew how much power they could make. We knew their aero drag, so we just keep dropping them. And sure enough, the aero drag kind of leveled out, and dropping them a little bit more, 2 or 3 centimeters, didn't matter. Then I said, okay, now we're going to drop you 6 centimeters more, way down. And I mean, they're down. They go, sure enough, the drag goes down, but they can't pedal. I go, that's right, you can't pedal. So now we whip off your 172 cranks, and I put 155 cranks
Opens up the hip.
on their bikes. They can pedal, and they freed them up. Their drag's down. Yeah, it opens up their hips, and off they go. So we go out to the runway because, you know, we got the runway right there. It's all marked off, and they're doing up and down the runway. Hey, it's like magic. So they dropped their 40K times by like a minute. So I'm sitting here on Facebook. There's a site that comes up called TT Bike Fits or something, and people take a side view of their bike and send it in. What can I do? And they have all these people give them, you know, advice, and their advice is always lower your seat height. But I'm telling you, I'm not a believer that the high hand position, it's not so much the hands, it's your whole position's high. Because I have tested enough to know that if your shoulder point here is higher than where your lats come together here, not in a good position. Your shoulder cranks, cannot get there. You know, it closes off your hips, can't breathe, all this goes wrong. The other thing is, this isn't necessarily good for an Ironman person or even a half Ironman person because you can't see the road ahead of you. You're just looking straight down, and triathletes really kind of need to see where they're going because they're coming around other athletes. For time trialing, 40K, and track racing, great, slam them. I'm telling you, there's speed there. You just got to go to short cranks and then really go down aggressive. But it's different thinking. And it just takes time and getting athletes out there to try this to prove it out. You can go to the wind tunnel and prove it, or you can go to, you know, some lab and do cranks and prove it. But until the people get out there and start racing it and living with it, then it doesn't become fact. And that's just what happened with aerobars. You know, everybody says, I don't need aerobars. I can man up through that. Turned out you can't. So that's what pops, but it's really working. Something for y'all to think about.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Sue's question was, and there's an issue with the Wahoo kicker bike. It appears, looking at the measurement, it appears that the spider, the 5-bolt pattern, is a proprietary distance. So there's no, it bolts to a basically a pulley wheel on the front, which then turns the load wheel on the back, and there's electronics that create the drag and everything on it. But you're kind of stuck with what they give you because of the proprietary BCD of the crank, the chainring, let's call them chainring bolts, which bolted onto the pulley wheel. You can't, so there was a fitter in East Coast or something that came up with a 3D printed interface where the Wahoo crank bolted onto the interface, and the interface then, or no, a regular crank bolted onto the interface on the outside, and then the other side bolted onto the pulley wheel. So it was a good, and then he put the purely custom adjustable cranks on the back to get the shortness. I think it went down to
They go down to 155.
155, I think it goes down to the new ones, I think, go down to 125 on the new custom ones. Yeah, they just came out with another, or had come out with a new one. They used to have two, they used to have what they call the baby ones, which were 145 to 170, 2.5, I think. And then there was a regular one, which was 155 to 180 or something like that. So that was the two models you used to have. But yeah, there's the tools, like John is saying, some of the tools that you really need to do analysis don't exist. So getting somebody warmed up and after doing a bike fit, before and after, there's not a lot of tools and there's not a lot of ways to incorporate a power meter to everybody's bike or everybody's performance, so you can show logically and realistically that, hey, before the fit, you were, like John was saying, you were 180 watts that you were putting out with a RPE of 7, example. And after the fit, you're putting out 210 watts at an RPE of 7. You're pedaling more efficiently, smoother. But unless you have a trainer, a smart trainer that can now report in watts, and then that's a lot of these trainers have watts, but there's no analytical application that runs on a Windows PC or something that runs the trainer. You have Zwift, you have Ruby, you have Full Gas, and all these other training applications, but you don't have anything that really just distributes watts, cadence, and some of the other items you need, metrics you need to show the person that, yes, we are in the right direction. We are pushing more power with, I think we just lost John here. Basically, you're pushing more power to after a fit than before a fit, and that's all that they're looking at. I see the age groupers too, people that come in. So here's an example. A guy comes in, he's 70 years old. He said, yeah, I just retired. I was a president, an owner of this company or that company. I'm getting into cycling. Now that I'm retired, I have time to do cycling. I loved cycling as a kid, but this darn bike, it used to fit me, but it just doesn't fit me anymore. We talk about it, and he brings in this old Medici or this old Colnago that he had as a kid. And I said, well, when you're 21 years old compared to 70, you're in a slightly different position on the bike before and after. So we have to adjust the bike to where you are now versus where you were back then. And it's a complete shock to them, but I'm seeing about 40 watts on the average increase in power before and after a bike ride. And some of that has to deal with, let's call it marginal gains. The cleats are ill-adjusted. Like Sue said, they might have the wrong shoes. They might have shoes that are too narrow, too long, maybe they're too big. Their feet are floating around. The shoes are falling apart. I had a guy come in one time, mountain bike shoes. The shoes were literally, they were 20 plus years old. They were falling apart as the way he was pedaling the bike. And the saddles, the cranks are too long usually. The saddles are too narrow. They're in the wrong position. The person's sitting in the wrong position. The stems are usually too long. They can't hold the bars correctly. So there's a number of things that you need to do to adjust. So yes, you can gain a lot of comfort and power and endurance get through a bike fit with the right parts. It just it's not the right thing to try to fit somebody on a bicycle by just adjusting what they bring in without trying to put and figure out and analyze, like John was saying, is be the pioneer. Put the right components on the bike. If they require 145 cranks or 150 long cranks, don't try to adjust them with the standard 175 or 172 and a half cranks that come with the bike. You have to change parts on the bikes to adapt to that person's anatomy and their cycling style. And that goes, everybody pedals differently. There is,
that's what the biggest thing is. I'll tell people, they'll call me and say, I'm on a bike fit. How much are they? I said, well, it starts at 200, but it probably could end up a couple of thousand. Not even ask you permission.
You just froze
change
there.
parts.
Yeah.
And
You're back, John. You just froze there for a second.
okay. So what I said was, I tell people when they bring their bikes in for a fitting, I can't give you a final price because I'm going to put whatever parts on there I need to make you faster.
Yeah.
And they could end up spending, a couple $1,000. I had a girl come in last week who just bought a brand new QR. This thing was $15,000. and she brought it in, and I spent a lot more money for her because it wasn't right. They didn't have the right cranks. It didn't have the right stem. It didn't have a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But I just said, she's qualified for Worlds, going to New Zealand, doing all that stuff. I said, if you're going to do all that, you got to fix it right.
Yeah.
And, she did it. But the fitters have to understand they're not doing themselves coddling people and put them on the right size parts.
Yeah, right size parts. That's correct for their anatomy. Like we said before, you can get 10 6-foot males in, and they're all going to be fit differently. Some are going to be on 175 cranks, some are going to be on 165 cranks, and everybody's built differently, and every fit should be a custom fit. And kind of the worst offenders are the spin bikes. During the COVID era, there was the lockdown to those 2 years. There was a lot of people that, again, it is a 170 crank. And there's a lot of people, if you look at the target market, women were riding it more than men were, and they were in the 5'2", 5'3", 5'4" range height. And they had 170 cranks. They were stuck with those cranks, and a lot of them were said, if you can't fix me, I'm going to take this and sell it back or send it back to Peloton because I can't ride it anymore. My knees are just blowing up. I can't, the pain. I called Peloton and said, do you want to get a hold of some real fitters that can really help you guys out? And they weren't interested. So I did my own fitting. I did over 500 Peloton fits those 2 years during the COVID lockdown, and fixed a lot of people so they could get back into the enjoyment of getting in shape and having fun doing the workouts on Peloton. And but it takes some experience. It takes some practice. It takes to the fact that you have to know what you're doing to fit the person correctly and put different equipment on the bikes to match where they are able to ride. One last quick story. A friend of mine, Bill Thomas, he teaches kinesiology over at Cal State Fullerton. He was California State Cat 2 individual time trial champion a few years ago. He's almost 6'4". He rode a Trek Speed Concept, was his time trial bike. 6'4", John, what do you think length cranks that the manufacturers would basically say he should be on? You're froze again, John. One more time. Yeah. Normally, you'd want to put him on the manufacturer would say, yeah, 6'4", 175 cranks. He won the California State Cat 2 state championships on 155s. And he's, again, 6'4". So it goes to show that everybody's going to be fit differently, and you have to kind of think outside the box to place that person in the right position for their anatomy and their range of motion limitations, whatever movement they have. Some people have hip impingement issues. They have longer legs and torso, or longer torso than legs, and they're all going to be fit differently. And you got to think about the whole person as a whole and adjust the bicycle. And like John said, you might have to change every component on that frame to adjust to that person.
Well, that's correct. And I have a local guy here who is 6'3". He's a pretty powerful rider, and he's state time trial championships this week. And he was riding 172. And I told him, I'm putting 155s on your bike.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of that is, though, you have to change the chain ring at the same time. As you go shorter on your crank, you need to actually go bigger on your chain ring.
Yeah.
Make all that really work out right. But he's going, and I think he won't set a new state record, but I think he'll be a low 50, like a 50.35 kind of time trial guy. And he's a big guy, and I told him on 155s, he went, they're just like, no way. I said, well, I gave him some, put him on his bike for him. So go to your little local course and try it. So he did. He said, well, that turned out pretty good. I knocked like a minute and a half off my time. I said, yeah. That's right. I said, now, if we had more time, I could get you lower and do more stuff. I said, but it's all baby steps. You got to do it all. But it all works. I did a lot of crank length versus down to 140 145s. We went, but they kept gaining power, and then they quit gaining power once we got past 145s.
Right. Yeah.
We would do these 10-minute power tests, and I was doing power versus heart rate tests at the same time, and that turned out to be pretty consistent. As you go down, I don't care how tall you are, but when you go down into the 140, 150, 145 range, you make more power, and then it quits happening when you get down below that. But a lot of times, going down to a 125 or 130 is more comfortable for a real super short person or somebody that has a hip impingement or something like that.
Yeah. And it has to do, if you think about what John is saying, is that where can you, let's talk about a squat. If you're doing a squat, can you handle more weight if you do a full squat so your butt is on the ground and then trying to stand up? Or if you're doing quarter squats where you're just barely going down and coming back up again? You can do a heck of a lot more weight with quarter squats. And by putting somebody on the right crank lengths, your knees or your leg angles and the way the muscles work best in the mid-range, they are always in tension and are always in the power zone, let's call it, versus trying to get up. So if your cranks are too long, at 12 o'clock position, when you're starting to unwind the leg again, going to 1 to 2 o'clock, you have to open up that leg enough to then get the power for the rest of the extension, because you don't have the leverage at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So your power zone is only maybe from 2 to 4, and then it cuts off. Versus if you got the right length cranks, you can have full power from just after 12 o'clock all the way almost to 6 o'clock. So that's where these pros are gaining some of the power, is because the joint angles are always in a power position, let's call it, when they're pushing down on the pedals. Sue, what are your thoughts? Being on 155s now, and
For me, you guys can sell more.
Well, the thought is I'm still looking for a 155 or a little less for my stationary bike.
On the Wahoo, yeah.
I mean, that's all I really want.
So if there's any engineers out there and want to get a good product line going, you're going to make a lot of sales by creating some kind of a crank solution for the Wahoo kicker bikes that you can go below 165.
No, we've contacted Wahoo and talked to them about this, and I don't know. There's an awful lot of women out there who would really, really like to have this. But so I'm not quite sure how they're marketing, and I don't know why they don't do this. Their easy solution is to make 2 different cranks, the current one, and then one that has adjustments down to like 140.
Yeah, you got two different models.
Just 2 different. You don't even have to have a slider. You just have to have a separate crank that the client could just reorder. I mean, it's not that hard.
But you would need you would theoretically need a bike fit, because everybody would choose the 165. They think, because
they might, but you could experiment. The thing with Wahoo that's really interesting, and with some of your pedals that are adjustable, is that you can try. I mean, you just put the pedal in a different location. And so it allows the client or the cyclist to essentially do experiments, just to see, what does it do if I do this? Or what does it feel like if I do this?
Or keep going around the circle instead of having 5.
Right. I mean, it's important. Yeah. It's important to have, someone around who understands what happens when you change the length. I mean, you have to change the seat height. So there's some things that make it a little more complicated, but we talk about it. I talk about shorter cranks with a lot of people. And my experience going from like 170 to 155, that was a pretty big jump. And so the first ride was most memorable. I was like, this is really amazing. So anyway, I just think, I'm hoping that manufacturers of bicycles will start to pay attention to you guys. It takes a long time. I'm not quite sure what has to happen, but
It's a slow process. It's complicated. What's happened now is every manufacturer comes out with some crazy bottom bracket style, and so then
yeah, no, I know about that.
Yeah.
I have a lot of bottom bracket extractor tools. I think
yeah.
just for, I mean, there must be 10 of them, different sizes, and it's all really kind of
Part two. Yeah, go to part two and look at the
different cups.
The cups that take off the bottom. Like gonna be like 12 of them out there now, and yeah, they're all different. Yeah, in fact, Shimano is they were leading the way. I used to ride with Wayne Stetna, and we had long talks all the time. And one of the things we talked about was the crank lengths. I told him, hey, I'm doing a lot of people and we're putting people on shorter cranks. I'm going with Cobb. I'm going with this, but people, and he said, well, we're never going to dummy down, let's call it the Dura-Ace. The Dura-Ace line in Shimano's viewpoint is for the European pros. In fact, the pedals have a little narrower Q factor to them, a little narrower pedal stance on the Dura-Ace compared to the Ultegra and the 105 and Look, Keo, etc. And we're never gonna change the Dura-Ace. And I think the Dura-Ace was 165 lowest at the time. And I said, well, what about the Ultegra? No, that's the standard people use that. That's the club version of the Dura-Ace. And I said, well, why don't you take the 105? Use the 105 as an experiment. And they came out with a 160 one year. Remember, a few years ago, they had the Dura-Ace 165, Ultegra 165, and the 105 was 60. That's because I fed back to them and said, you're going to get a lot of sales on that because people are going to like the 160, and you're going to be the only company doing it because the other companies aren't. They're still stuck at the 165. And look at now, the Dura-Ace comes in 160, the Ultegra comes in 160, and the 105 still comes in 160. So I told them that's good, but you still have more to go. Let's see, a 155 and a 150, and then you'll be on your way. But you're on the right track. And I give Shimano credit for being brave enough to at least take one of the road cranks and put a 160 on there that people need. And like Sue was saying, a lot more people need 155s and 150s and 145s. We need the whole gamut. And that's where John Cobb comes in. You do have the solutions that the manufacturers don't have, that your cranks do fit the standard bicycles, and they are it's a real solution for a lot of people. And we commend you for having those products available and being brave enough to produce them.
Well, all I need to do is find that fountain of youth. I'm not having energy I did 20 years ago.
Yeah. And so I guess we're going on for a while, John. We appreciate you and the stories and how things got started. I think you got some good products, saddles that are real solutions for real people, and the cranks definitely are. I've sold a lot of cranks for a lot of people that couldn't ride 165. They need something shorter, and really look at speedandcomfort.com is John's site. Look at the cranks, go through. John has some studies on there. He talks about this and that. Give it a shot. If you are going to a bike fitter and you're a consumer, you're going to a bike fitter, and the bike fitter is going to try to fit you on the existing equipment that comes with the bike, like John said, run the other direction, because probably that equipment will not fit you in the right. They're only going to be able to adjust to a certain point, and then won't be able to fit you any better going forward. So it's a whole system. The shoes have to be right. The insoles have to be right. The pedals have to be right. The cleat placement has to be right. The crank length has to be right. The Q factor has to be right. The saddle height has to be right. The saddle fore aft has to be right. The saddle angle has to be right. The saddle width has to be right. The right saddle has to be right. The right stem length has to be right. The right width bars have to be right. The stem in the right direction, plus or minus, that has to be right. And it's all a system to put you on the bicycle so you're pedaling efficiently, comfortably, and safely. And that's what a good fitter will try to do. And they have to look at all those things to get you on the bike correctly. And there's a lot to it that and it's not just a kind of what got me started in it. I saw a YouTube video one time about a bike fitter that was going through this is how to do a bike fit. They did not know the difference between the greater trochanter and the iliac crest. They were measuring the person at the top pivot point at the top of the iliac crest and not the greater trochanter. The iliac crest does not rotate back and forth. It's the static point. So there's a lot to it. Again, study some anatomy, kinesiology, biomechanics. You're going to understand a lot better as to how the body moves and how to go forward. I do teach bike fitting as well, and most of my students are now physical therapists. I have very few bike shop people coming in anymore, but it's all physical therapists that want to get involved in bike fitting because they do know how the body moves, and they are interested in doing a continued level of care for the person that might have gotten injured, and then don't put them back on an ill-fit bicycle where they get re-injured again right away. So there's a lot to it to make the people comfortable and safe on the bicycle. So John, any parting words, parting shots?
Well, I appreciate you thinking of me, and y'all welcome to call me anytime. I'll talk to you best I can and try to help everybody.
Well, thank you, John. Again, to get his number, speedandcomfort.com, and talk to John. He is one of the guys that really knows what he's talking about and what he's doing. And Sue, how about you? Any parting shots for the audience?
No, mostly a thank you to John. It's always been a great pleasure for me to meet leaders in cycling, and clearly you are one. And your history is really interesting. You didn't really mention what you did in your art degree or what your focus was. Well, you said that you could look at something and know if it was right. So
well, that's true.
I
You can visualize things really well, and so that really helps me because if I want to, I don't have to go to I can visualize what I want, but you can't make a living doing that. So then I started doing something else.
Okay, so no, I mean, it's interesting where you came from. And it makes sense because half the bike fitting that when I see bike fitters and talk to them, that's the experience level. It seems like you had that before, maybe even, all of the mechanic stuff, but you were able to assess holistically a rider, which is not a skill that most fitters have until they've worked on this for a long time. So
that's because a lot of fitters don't ride bikes enough. If you ride bikes, I'm 75 years old. I still do triathlons. But if you go ride enough, something hurts. You got to work on it. Fix it
yeah,
out.
no, I agree. I think that's wonderful. So thanks for joining us today.
I want to ask John, one more thing before we sign off. I want Sue, you'd be interested in what Sue's, let's call it thesis that she had worked on for years and what her claim to fame is in the neuroscience area. So Sue, give them a quick, what you did on the chickens.
Yeah, well, I mean, just really quick. My field of expertise is inherited photoreceptor disease, and photoreceptors in the retina are required to see. And there are several that affect newborn infants. And so I had an animal model that was an avian model, and specifically a chicken. And so for my entire career was focused on figuring out what was wrong with the sight in this chicken. Um, so from the very beginning, through identifying the genetic mutation, developing a lentiviral vector, which is a virus that's going to carry a normal gene into the photoreceptors and infect them so it can express the normal gene. I worked through making vectors, building vectors, delivering vectors, and the end result was that the blind chicken could see. So I was able to restore sight. And I was one of the first scientists to do that. So that was pretty exciting. And I mean,
chickens.
yeah, well, just like you, you make a change and you see this kind of result and you go, is that real? So bike fitters might make changes and you see a vast improvement in performance. I am sure that you went back and checked things and possibly redid things. So scientists do that too, where we don't believe what we see easily, and we work on it until we're convinced. So when you take your good saddles out on the road and you continue to carve them, it sounds like you're really being a scientist.
Well, that's what I tell people. My success list is about that long, and my failure list is about.
Oh, yeah. So my success was a day, and the effort to get there was 30 years. So
you have to be willing to accept the.
Yep. Yep. Well, thank you, John. I think we'll end it here. And as always, if you ever want to come back on, we can do a part 2. It'd be a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun talking with you, and we appreciate the time you gave to us. I think the audience will really enjoy the stories and what your history and everything. And I just want to say again, thank you very much. And for all those, please go to speedandcomfort.com and take a look at what he has to offer. It's really going to help you out as a cyclist. Thank you, John. Have a good day and take care.
Thank y'all. Enjoyed it.